a major deadline for retroactive toxic exposure benefits, and cancer concerns at a nuclear base. All that and more today, August 9th, 2023. Good morning, early birds. I'm Zamone Perez, and this is the Early Bird Brief, produced by Defense News and Military Times. Today is a big deadline for retroactive payouts for new toxic military exposure benefits. That's connected to sweeping benefits legislation President Joe Biden signed into law last summer called the Promise to Address Comprehensive Toxics Act. It's more commonly called the PACT Act. Here's why it matters. As many as 1 in 5 veterans living in America today could receive new healthcare or disability payouts because of the measure. An important note for listeners, veterans who apply or submit an intent to apply for PACT Act payouts within a year of the bill signing are potentially eligible for retroactive benefits back to August 10, 2022. That means those veterans have through today to act. Veterans who enroll after today will only receive payouts back to their date of filing. The PACT Act provides presumptive benefit status for various types of cancer and respiratory illnesses linked to burn pit exposure in the Gulf War and the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. But the benefits are limited to veterans affected by burn pits. It also provides benefits for some troops who may have been exposed to toxins in the Indo-Pacific, including Agent Orange during the Vietnam War. Defense Department and Department of Veterans Affairs officials recently encouraged applying before today's deadline.
For current service members who are planning to leave the military, you can apply for your VA disability benefits up to 6 months before your separation. And please make sure that you describe any possible toxic exposures and symptoms during your separation health assessment.
If you're a Vietnam vet or a veteran of Central Command from 1991 to 2021, apply for your toxic exposure benefits and care right now, and reapply if you've been denied before.
Since the PACT Act was signed into law, the VA has received nearly 786,000 disability claims, processed almost 435,000, and approved more than 348,000. About 111,000 veterans who are believed to have toxic exposure have enrolled in VA healthcare since the law was enacted. There have, of course, been challenges as the VA implements the legislation. Hiring new staff to accommodate a historic influx of claims has proved to be difficult. There is a backlog for claims to be processed. VA officials updated lawmakers last month about their progress implementing the bill, including the process of screening for toxic exposure.
We've now screened more than 4 million veterans across the country for toxic exposures. It's a standard questionnaire happening in every primary care clinic, increasingly more types of clinics like mental health and specialty care. And should a veteran indicate that they've been exposed to one of these toxins, they are then referred to a stage 2 screening, which allows us to understand better what their specific concerns are. Their current diagnoses are canvassed, and we call this exposure-informed care because we've now trained tens of thousands of clinicians to do the screening, but over 140,000 clinicians who treat veterans on what these exposures might mean for future conditions.
President Joe Biden is scheduled to mark the bill's anniversary at a Veterans Affairs hospital in Salt Lake City tomorrow.
It's one of the most significant laws in our history to help millions of veterans who are exposed to toxic substances during their military service.
Veterans or family members can find additional information about the PACT Act by clicking on the Burn Pit section on the Military Times website, or by taking advice from John Stewart.
Hey everybody, it's John Stewart. For all those who served, who might have been exposed to burn pits or Agent Orange from whatever conflict you were in, wherever you served, you may be eligible for benefits under the PACT Act. And we need you to find out, and we need you to get the benefits that you've earned.
Another important story, the Air Force detected unsafe levels of a likely carcinogen at underground launch control centers at a Montana nuclear missile base. That's at Malmstrom Air Force Base, where a striking number of service members have reported cancer diagnoses. Air Force Global Strike Command said the discovery is the first from an extensive sampling of active U.S. intercontinental ballistic missile bases to address specific cancer concerns raised by missile community members. In those samples, 2 launch facilities at the base showed PCB levels higher than the thresholds recommended by the Environmental Protection Agency. But what are PCBs? Well, they're oily or waxy substances that the EPA has identified as a likely carcinogen. The commander of Air Force Global Strike Command directed immediate measures to begin the cleanup process for affected facilities and mitigate exposure by airmen and guardians to potentially hazardous conditions. According to the Torchlight Initiative, at least 286 troops who served at nuclear missile sites, or their surviving family members have self-reported being diagnosed with cancer, blood diseases, or other illnesses over the past several decades. At least 217 of those reported cases are cancers, and at least 33 of them are non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, a rare blood cancer. But here's what's interesting about those reported numbers. The missileer community is very small. In case you're curious, missileers are military officers who served in underground launch control centers. They are responsible for monitoring and, if needed, launching fields of silo-based nuclear weapons. 2 missileers spend sometimes days at a time on watch in underground bunkers. They're ready to turn the key and fire Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic missiles if ordered to do so by the president. The silo fields are only at 3 bases: Malmstrom, F.E. Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming, and Minnow Air Force Base in North Dakota. That means in any given year, only a few hundred airmen serve as missileers. According to the Torchlight Initiative, there have only been about 21,000 missileers in total since Minutemen operations began in the early 1960s. In other news, there's a new conversation when it comes to military fitness. Where exactly to measure a service member's waist? Fitness experts for each of the military services recently described how they're on track to eliminate the inaccuracies in body fat measurement methods that have frustrated service members with non-standard builds for decades. The reports were in a recent brief to a Defense Department Advisory Committee. But when it comes to the hated but hard to eliminate tape test, no two services can agree on where to measure a service member's waist. The Defense Department requires each service to conduct a body composition assessment, but existing measurement-based methods are error-prone, particularly for women. For example, a recent Marine Corps study found that less than 1% of male Marines were incorrectly measured under the service's existing tape test. The same study revealed 6.3% of female Marines were incorrectly measured. If a soldier is out of standards in both height and weight screening and waist measurement, they can seek a commander's approval to get scanned via state-of-the-art machines. The Marine Corps in 2022 made a similar change. And multiple branches are investing in the same high-tech fat measurement equipment, but the tape test is still required before the machine assessment. The Air Force unveiled a new body fat assessment program for airmen and guardians in 2023. The service actually brought back a tape test that assesses only waist-to-height ratio after shutting down the old waist measurement tape test in 2020. A more comprehensive new program is still forthcoming. And the Navy is halfway through a 2-year study of its body fat analysis methods. It's continuing for now to measure men at the neck and waist, and women at the neck, waist, and hips. Also on your radar for today, the Army is planning to grow its Patriot Air and Defense Missile Force. That's according to the head of Space and Missile Defense Command, Lieutenant Daniel Karbler, who spoke to reporters in a briefing yesterday. Karbler would not specifically say how many more Patriot units the Army plans to field. He said he didn't want to get ahead of Army senior leadership. Here's why it matters. The Army has 15 Patriot battalions across the active force. Deployment times for Patriot units sometimes go above the traditional 6 to 9 month rotations, and demands on the force have been a long-time issue for the service. And even though the service wants to grow air defense units, it is facing headwinds when it comes to recruiting. Karbler said one way to recruit air defenders is to see if there's opportunities for soldiers who want to re-enlist to come into the Patriot force. Congress requested the Army report on whether it needs more Patriot batteries in the fiscal 2023 National Defense Authorization Act. And now, here's some other stories that we're hearing chirps about. Officials said yesterday that divers recovered the flight data recorder from an Australian Army helicopter that crashed at sea last month. The incident killed 4 crew members during a military exercise with the United States. In case you missed it, a U.S. submarine pulled into an Australian naval base last week. The U.S. Navy said the USS North Carolina is the first American nuclear-powered submarine to visit Western Australia since the pact between Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States was announced. Secretary of the Navy Carlos Del Toro announced this week that a future Navajo-class towing, salvage, and rescue ship will be named in honor of Salman Atkinson, a pioneering Navy SEAL and an Alaska Native. And the Air Force announced this week that airmen and guardians seeking mental health care have access to a new referral system intended to accelerate access thanks to the Brandon Act. That legislation, which was recently signed into law, is named after Navy Aviation Electrician's Mate 3rd Class Brandon Caserta, who died by suicide in 2018.
Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
And on this day in history, in 1974, President Gerald Ford took the oath of office to become the 38th Commander-in-Chief after President Richard Nixon resigned. That's it for us this morning. To get top stories and breaking news, go to defensenews.com/EBB to subscribe to the Early Bird Brief newsletter. Please give us a like, rating, and a comment wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to follow us on social media at @defense_news and @Military Times. This episode of the Early Bird Brief is hosted and produced by me, Zimone Z. Perez. Today's episode features stories by Leo Shane III, the Associated Press, Hope Hodge-Sek, and Jen Judson. Our editor-in-chief is Mike Gruss. Have a great day.